Amara sat on the edge of the old, worn-out couch in the corner of their small apartment. The sunlight streamed in through the dusty window, casting a soft glow on the faded curtains. It was a quiet afternoon, the kind of day when everything seemed to stand still. But inside Amara's chest, her heart raced, and her mind spun in confusion. She felt strange, dizzy, weak, and her stomach hurt more than she had ever felt before. She pressed her small hands to her stomach, hoping the pain would fade away, but it only grew sharper. Amara had always been a strong girl, energetic and full of life, always running around the house, laughing and playing with her friends. But today, something was different. Today, the pain was too much to ignore. Her mother, Clara, was in the kitchen, humming a soft tune as she chopped vegetables. The smell of the evening's dinner, a simple meal of beans and rice, filled the room, but Amara couldn't focus on it. All she could focus on was the aching in her stomach. She felt hot, and sweat was beading on her forehead. Her mind raced with thoughts she couldn't explain. She wanted to tell her mother, but she didn't want to worry her. After all, it was just a little pain, right? It had to be. It couldn't be anything serious. "Mom," Amara whispered, her voice barely audible. Her hands clenched tighter against her stomach as if she could hold the pain inside. Clara didn't hear her at first. The sound of the knife against the cutting board filled the air, mixing with the quiet hum of the radio. But when Amara spoke again, her voice more urgent this time, Clara turned quickly. "What is it, baby?" Clara asked, her eyes filled with concern. Her face, always warm and loving, now showed the first signs of worry. I don't feel good, Mom." Amara's voice trembled as she slowly stood up from the couch, her knees shaking beneath her. She took a step forward but stopped, clutching her stomach. The pain was so bad now that it was hard to breathe. Clara immediately dropped the knife and rushed over to her daughter. "What's wrong, Amara? Talk to me, baby." Amara didn't know what to say. How could she explain the tightness in her chest, the way the world seemed to spin when she moved? She shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. She didn't want to make her mother panic. My stomach hurts so much, Mom." Amara's voice was barely above a whisper, but Clara heard the fear in it. Clara's heart sank. She had seen her daughter through fevers and small injuries, but this felt different. Amara had never looked so pale. Clara's hand instinctively went to Amara's forehead, feeling the heat radiating off her. "You're burning up, sweetie." Clara's voice cracked, but she quickly masked her fear with a calmness she didn't feel. Okay, let's sit you down." She guided Amara back to the couch, her own hands shaking as she helped her daughter sit down. Amara's eyes were closed, and her breathing was shallow. Clara knelt down in front of her, her eyes scanning Amara's face. She hated seeing her daughter like this, so weak, so fragile. "Amara, sweetheart, tell me exactly where it hurts. Is it just your stomach?" Clara asked, trying to stay calm, though her heart was racing. Amara nodded weakly, her face contorted with pain. "Yes, Mom, it hurts here," she said, pointing to the area just above her belly button. Clara placed her hand gently on her daughter's stomach, but it only seemed to make Amara wince in discomfort. Her mind began to spin with worry. This didn't feel like any regular stomachache. Was it something more serious? Could it be a stomach bug? Or something worse? "Mom, I'm scared," Amara said quietly, her voice so small it nearly broke Clara's heart. Clara's throat tightened as she held her daughter's hand. "You're going to be okay, Amara," she said, though she wasn't sure if she believed it herself. "We're going to figure this out, all right." Amara didn't respond. She just closed her eyes and leaned back against the couch, her breathing shallow and uneven. Clara stood up and grabbed her phone, dialing the emergency number without thinking. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, the urgency of the situation sinking in with every passing second. The phone rang. Once. Twice. Finally, someone picked up. 911, what's your emergency? My daughter, she's not feeling well, Clara said, her voice shaky. Her stomach hurts so much, and she has a fever. I don't know what to do. Please, help. Ma'am, stay calm. I'm sending an ambulance to your location right now. Just stay with her and make sure she's comfortable until they arrive. Clara hung up the phone and turned back to Amara. Her daughter's eyes were now closed, but the pain was still visible on her face. I'm here, baby. You're going to be okay. Help is coming, Clara whispered, her voice thick with fear. She sat back down beside Amara, holding her hand tightly. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, marking each passing second. Clara's mind raced, filled with so many questions. What was happening to her daughter? Why had the pain come so suddenly? And, most of all, why couldn't she take it away? Outside, the world went on as usual. People were walking by, going to work, enjoying their evening. But inside this small apartment, time seemed to stop. Everything blurred except for Amara, and the intense worry that gripped Clara's heart. It felt like hours before the sirens of the ambulance finally echoed in the distance. But Clara stayed right there, holding Amara's hand, whispering words of comfort she wasn't sure Amara could hear. Don't worry, sweetie, Clara murmured, pressing a kiss to Amara's forehead. Help is almost here. You're not alone. You'll never be alone. But as the ambulance grew closer, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something much deeper was wrong. Something she couldn't see, something she couldn't understand. And she was scared. The sound of the ambulance sirens grew louder and louder as Clara stood by Amara's side, her heart pounding with fear. Every second felt like an eternity. She kept whispering to her daughter, trying to comfort her, but Amara's breathing had become more shallow. Her small body trembled, and Clara could feel the heat rising from her forehead. Please, Amara, stay with me, Clara whispered, trying to keep the panic from her voice. The doorbell rang suddenly, cutting through the tense silence in the room. Clara jumped to her feet, rushing to open the door. Two paramedics stood outside, their faces serious but calm. Ma'am, we're here to help, one of the paramedics said gently, holding up his hand. Where's your daughter? She's in the living room, Clara replied, stepping aside quickly to let them in. Please, hurry. She's in so much pain. I don't know what's happening. The paramedics moved quickly. One went to Amara's side, checking her vitals, while the other spoke to Clara in a soft, reassuring tone. We'll take good care of her, ma'am. Don't worry, the first paramedic said as he looked at Amara, his eyes sharp and professional. Can you tell us what happened? When did the pain start? Clara's eyes filled with tears as she watched them work, her hands shaking. She just started complaining about stomach pain. At first, I thought it was nothing, maybe just a small upset stomach. But then, it got worse. She's burning up with fever. I've never seen her like this. The paramedic nodded, his face serious. It's good that you called us when you did. We'll take her to the hospital right away. Stay calm, okay? We'll do everything we can. Clara nodded, but the worry was still written all over her face. As the paramedics moved Amara onto the stretcher and began preparing to transport her, Clara's heart sank. She had been so focused on trying to comfort her daughter, she hadn't even thought about how serious this could be. Was this something more than just a bad stomachache? Could it be something that would change their lives forever? Mom, Amara's weak voice pulled Clara from her thoughts. Her daughter's eyes were open, but they looked unfocused, as if she was drifting in and out of sleep. She reached out a trembling hand to her mother. I'm scared, Mom. Clara knelt down beside her daughter, her own tears falling freely now. She took Amara's hand in hers, holding it as tightly as she could. I know, sweetie. I know you're scared. But we're going to the hospital now, and the doctors are going to make you feel better. You're not alone. I'm right here with you. Amara's grip tightened for a moment before her hand slipped back down to the bed. Clara kissed her forehead, her heart breaking with each passing second. The paramedics continued to move swiftly, but Clara couldn't bring herself to leave her daughter's side. Finally, Amara was safely secured in the ambulance, and Clara climbed in beside her. The doors shut with a soft thud, and the sirens blared as they pulled away from the apartment. The ride to the hospital was a blur for Clara. She tried to keep her eyes on Amara, but her mind kept racing with questions and fears. What could be wrong with her daughter? Why had this happened so suddenly? Was this something serious, or would they be home soon, laughing about how scared they'd been? But no matter how hard she tried to convince herself that everything would be okay, the doubt wouldn't leave her. The fear was too real, too overwhelming. As they drove through the busy city streets, Clara's thoughts turned to Darnell, Amara's father. It had been years since he had been a part of their lives, and yet, every now and then, Clara would catch herself wondering what might have been different if he had stayed. If he had been there for their daughter. If he had been there for Amara when she needed him the most. Clara knew it was too late for regret, but still, the thought lingered. She hadn't wanted to bring it up in front of Amara, but now, in the quiet of the ambulance, it was impossible to ignore. Darnell hadn't been a part of their lives for so long. Would he even care if something happened to Amara? She shook her head, trying to push the thoughts away. There was no time for that. All that mattered now was getting her daughter the help she needed. Nothing else mattered. The ambulance pulled up to the hospital, its tires screeching to a halt. The paramedics rushed to unload Amara, and Clara followed closely behind, her heart in her throat. She could feel the weight of her daughter's pain in every step, and all she could do was pray that the doctors could fix it. Let's get her inside, one of the paramedics said. We'll take it from here. Clara nodded, but her legs felt like jelly as she followed them into the hospital. They passed through the sterile, brightly lit halls, and Clara's mind couldn't help but wander back to her daughter's words. I'm scared, Mom. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to hold back the tears, but they came anyway. It hurt to see Amara like this. It hurt even more to know that she couldn't take the pain away. The doctors and nurses took over as soon as they entered the emergency room. They immediately began checking Amara's vitals, asking Clara a series of questions she couldn't fully answer. She felt like she was drowning in the uncertainty of it all. The waiting room felt too cold, too silent. Clara was left to sit alone with her thoughts. She could hear the doctors talking in the next room, their voices low and serious, but she couldn't make out what they were saying. Time seemed to stretch on forever as she waited, each minute feeling like an hour. She could only pray that Amara would be okay. But with every passing moment, her fear only grew stronger. The door to the emergency room opened. A doctor walked in, his face unreadable. "Ma'am, we need to talk," he said gently. Clara's heart skipped a beat. She stood up, her legs unsteady beneath her. "What's wrong with her?" she asked, her voice tight with anxiety. The doctor hesitated for a moment, his eyes studying Clara carefully. "We're still running tests, but I can tell you that she's in a lot of pain. We're going to do everything we can, but," the doctor's words trailed off, and Clara felt her stomach drop. It was then that she realized just how serious this could be. The hospital room was quiet, too quiet for Clara's comfort. She sat in a stiff chair next to Amara's bed, her eyes never leaving her daughter. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor was the only sound that filled the air, and with every beat, Clara's heart felt heavier. She could see the slight rise and fall of Amara's chest, but her daughter's face was pale and her eyes were closed. Clara had been here for hours, waiting for some sign of improvement. The doctors had said they needed more time to run tests, but every second without answers only made the weight of fear heavier. She had tried calling Darnell, Amara's father, but there had been no answer. She couldn't help but feel a pang of hurt as she stared at her daughter's still form. Darnell had been gone for years. He had walked away when Amara was only a toddler, choosing his career and a life of luxury over his family. Over the years, Clara had done her best to raise Amara alone, and though it hadn't been easy, they had built a life together. A good life. She had made sure Amara always knew she was loved, that she was never alone, but sometimes, in moments like this, Clara couldn't help but wonder how different things could have been if Darnell had stayed. Would Amara be in this hospital bed if he had been around? Could he have helped her, or was he just as lost as Clara felt in this moment? Clara sighed, rubbing her tired eyes. She had been strong for Amara all this time, but right now, in this moment, her strength was fading. Just then, her phone buzzed, and her heart skipped a beat. It was a message from Darnell. "I just saw your missed calls. What's wrong with Amara? Is she okay?" Clara's fingers trembled as she typed a quick response. "She's in the hospital. She's really sick. I don't know what's happening. The doctors are still trying to figure it out. I need you here." She stared at the screen, waiting for a reply, but it took a few minutes before his message came through. "I'm on my way. Don't worry. I'll be there soon." Clara's eyes filled with tears again. She wasn't sure if she was relieved or frustrated. Why hadn't he called her back sooner? Why was it always like this with him only showing up when something went wrong? She shook her head, trying to push the negative thoughts aside. Right now, Amara needed her, not old hurts from the past. Outside, the sun was starting to set, casting long shadows through the window. The hallway was quiet, too, with only the occasional nurse or doctor walking past. Clara stared out the window, trying to distract herself. She wished she could trade places with Amara, take away her pain, make it all go away. But all she could do was wait. And then, as if on cue, the door to the hospital room opened. Clara turned, and her breath caught in her throat. Standing there, tall and confident as always, was Darnell. It had been years since Clara had seen him, but she would never forget the way he looked, the same way he always did: sharp suit, expensive shoes, and the faint hint of arrogance in his posture. But now, as he stepped into the room, there was something different about him. His face was etched with concern, his eyes softer than they used to be. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Clara just watched him, unsure of what to say. Darnell, on the other hand, didn't seem to know how to approach her either. It had been a long time since their paths had crossed, and even though they shared a daughter, they felt like strangers in that moment. Finally, Darnell broke the silence. "How is she?" he asked, his voice tight with worry as he walked to Amara's bed. Clara stood up, brushing a stray tear from her cheek. "They don't know yet. They're still running tests, but she's not doing well. I've been here all day. The doctors, they're not sure what's causing the pain." Darnell's face darkened as he looked at Amara, his daughter, lying so still in the bed. Clara watched him carefully, noticing the way his jaw tightened as he took in the sight of Amara's pale face. "I'm sorry," Darnell said, his voice almost a whisper. "I should have been here sooner. I didn't realize. I didn't know. I've been so caught up in everything else." Clara felt a wave of anger rise in her chest, but she forced it down. Now wasn't the time. Amara needed them both to be strong, and if she let herself get upset over old wounds, nothing would get better. "I understand," she said quietly. "But right now, I just need you to be here for her." She needs her father. Darnell nodded, his eyes staying on Amara. There was a long, uncomfortable silence before he spoke again. I'm not good at this, Clara, he admitted. I've been away for so long. I don't know how to do this, how to be the father she deserves. Clara's heart softened just a little. She had never wanted to push Darnell away from Amara, but the years of hurt had made it difficult to let him back in. Now, seeing him stand there, looking lost and vulnerable, she realized that maybe, just maybe, he was trying to make up for the time he had missed. You don't have to be perfect, Darnell, Clara said, her voice gentle. You just have to be here. That's all she needs. And you're here now, and that's enough. Darnell looked at her, his eyes full of guilt and regret. I'm sorry, Clara, he whispered. I'm sorry for all the years I missed. I should have been there for you both. Clara nodded, unsure of what to say. The years of pain and resentment didn't disappear with one apology, but in this moment, it didn't matter. Amara needed them both, and they would do whatever it took to help her get better. Just then, a doctor entered the room, interrupting the quiet moment. Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, he said, looking directly at them. We've finished the initial tests, and we have some answers. Clara's heart leapt in her chest. What's wrong with her? Is she going to be okay? The doctor's expression remained calm, but Clara could see the seriousness in his eyes. We've identified the problem. It's a condition called pancreatitis. We caught it in time, but she'll need to stay here for treatment. Clara and Darnell exchanged a glance. The doctor's words were a relief. They now knew what was causing the pain, but the journey ahead was still uncertain. I'll explain everything to you both, the doctor continued, but the good news is she'll recover with the right care. We'll monitor her closely over the next few days. Darnell exhaled deeply, the weight on his shoulders lifting slightly. Clara's relief was mixed with exhaustion, but at least they had a plan. At least Amara would be okay. As the doctor explained the next steps, Clara felt a small spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could put the past behind them. Maybe they could be a family again, even if it was just for Amara's sake. And for the first time in a long time, Clara felt like things might just be all right. The room was filled with the quiet hum of machines, and the soft beeping of Amara's heart monitor provided a steady rhythm. The doctors had explained her condition, pancreatitis, a painful and serious condition, but the good news was that it was treatable. With time, rest, and the right medications, Amara would recover. Clara sat beside Amara's bed, her fingers gently stroking her daughter's hand. It had been days since the hospital visit, and though Amara had begun to show signs of improvement, Clara still couldn't shake the fear that lingered in the pit of her stomach. The thought of losing her daughter, of not being able to protect her from harm, was something Clara couldn't bear. She glanced over at Darnell, who was sitting on the other side of the room, his eyes fixed on Amara. He had been here every day since the diagnosis, showing up earlier than Clara expected, staying later than she thought he would. In the beginning, his presence had felt strange, unwelcome even. But now, after all these years, she was starting to see a change in him. A genuine concern for Amara. It was the first time in a long time that Clara felt like Darnell was finally showing up as a father. But there were still walls between them. Years of pain, regret, and unanswered questions didn't disappear overnight. Clara took a deep breath and turned her attention back to Amara. Her daughter's breathing had steadied, and the pale color in her cheeks had started to return. Though she was still weak, Amara seemed more peaceful than she had been when they first arrived at the hospital. Darnell stood up from his chair, walking quietly toward the bed. He hesitated for a moment before gently resting a hand on Amara's shoulder. His touch was soft, almost as if he feared he might hurt her. He looked down at her, his face filled with something Clara couldn't quite read. Regret, perhaps. Or maybe longing. She looks better today, Darnell said, his voice quieter than usual. Clara nodded, offering a small smile. Yes, she's doing much better. The doctors say she'll be able to leave soon. We just have to make sure everything heals properly. Darnell didn't respond immediately. Instead, he continued to stare at Amara, his eyes distant, as if lost in thought. Clara watched him, her mind wandering to the years they had spent apart. It wasn't easy to forgive, but it was harder to ignore the man who had once been her partner. The father of her child. I should have been here sooner, Darnell said quietly, breaking the silence. I should have never left. Clara's heart clenched at his words, but she didn't say anything at first. What was there to say? She had heard these words before, too many times. But something in his voice made her hesitate, made her wonder if he truly meant it this time. Darnell, she began softly, her voice steady despite the emotions swirling inside her, what happened between us it happened. We can't change that now. All we can do is move forward. Amara needs both of us, and if you're here for her, then that's what matters. Darnell's gaze shifted to her, his expression unreadable. I don't know if I can fix everything I've broken, he said, his voice cracking just slightly. But I want to try. I want to be here for her. And for you, if you'll let me. Clara felt a lump form in her throat at his words. She wasn't sure if she could forgive him so easily, or if she should even try. But something about the sincerity in his voice made her believe that he was finally realizing what he had lost. And in this moment, maybe that was enough. Let's take it one day at a time, she said quietly, her voice filled with uncertainty but also hope. We'll figure it out together. For Amara's sake. Darnell nodded, a small, almost relieved smile tugging at the corner of his lips. One day at a time, he repeated, as if the idea had given him a sense of peace. Clara couldn't help but notice the way he looked at Amara now. There was something different in his eyes, something softer, more tender. It made her wonder if he had always cared but just didn't know how to show it. Maybe, in time, they could rebuild the trust that had been broken. As the days passed, Darnell's presence became a constant in the hospital room. Clara watched as he slowly found his place beside Amara, reading to her, talking to her, doing his best to comfort her in his own way. Clara was still cautious, still unsure of what this meant for their future, but she appreciated the effort. For Amara, this was the most important thing. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Darnell stood by the window, staring out at the city. The orange glow of the setting sun cast a warm light across the room. Clara, sitting beside Amara's bed, couldn't help but notice the change in him. He seemed less the man who had abandoned them years ago and more like the father Amara needed. Amara's strong, Darnell said quietly, his voice almost reflective. I didn't realize how strong she was. I don't think I fully understood what it means to be a father until now. Clara looked at him, unsure of how to respond. The walls between them were still there, but something had shifted. Maybe it was the fear they had both shared over Amara's health. Maybe it was the long, quiet nights in the hospital room, where time seemed to stand still. Whatever it was, it had made Darnell realize something important. She's a fighter, Clara replied, her voice soft but proud. Just like her mother. Darnell turned to face her, and for the first time in a long while, their eyes met. There was no anger, no bitterness, just an understanding. A quiet acknowledgement that the past, no matter how painful, was behind them. They had both made mistakes, but the love they shared for Amara was stronger than all of it. For the first time, Clara allowed herself to believe that things might get better. That maybe, just maybe, they could build a new beginning for themselves, a family, even if it was different from what they had once imagined. Amara stirred in her sleep, her fingers twitching slightly as if responding to their voices. Clara leaned down, brushing a lock of hair from her daughter's forehead, her heart swelling with love and gratitude. "We're in this together," Clara whispered, her voice full of promise. "We'll always be here for you." Darnell nodded silently, his eyes softening as he looked at his daughter. It wasn't a perfect moment, but it was a start. And sometimes, that was all they needed. The hospital room had become a second home for Clara, each passing day blending into the next. But it was a home filled with hope, and for the first time in a long while, hope was all Clara could hold onto. Amara's condition was improving slowly, but the pain from her illness still lingered in her eyes. Yet, there was something new in the air now. A sense of possibility. Clara had always imagined this moment would be different, her and Darnell coming together in a way that felt natural and easy. But reality was never that simple. Every word, every glance between them felt loaded with the weight of their past. The years they had spent apart couldn't simply be erased. Still, Clara couldn't ignore the change she had seen in Darnell. The man who had once been distant and self-absorbed was now showing up for Amara in ways Clara had never expected. And that made all the difference. On this particular morning, Clara sat by the window, her hands wrapped around a warm cup of coffee. The sky outside was clear, the soft light of the sun casting a gentle glow across the hospital room. Amara was still asleep, her body resting after a long night of recovery. The monitors beeped steadily, offering Clara the reassurance that her daughter was still holding on, still fighting. Darnell had left early this morning to take care of some things. He said he would be back later. The truth was, Clara didn't know how to feel about Darnell's presence in her life now. There were moments when she felt his return was a blessing, and then there were moments when she felt it was too late. Could she really forgive him for all the years of hurt? Could Amara? Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. Clara looked up and saw a nurse standing in the doorway, a gentle smile on her face. "Good morning, Mrs. Johnson," the nurse said kindly. "How is Amara today?" Clara stood up, her face lighting up with a faint smile. "She's doing better. Still weak, but the doctors say she's improving. Thank you for all your care." The nurse nodded, her expression warm. "It's our pleasure. I'm glad to hear she's on the mend. I'll check on her vitals in a moment, but I wanted to let you know that we've arranged for a family meeting with the doctor later today. He'll give you a full update on her progress." Clara's heart lifted slightly. "That sounds good. Thank you again." The nurse smiled and stepped out of the room, leaving Clara alone with her thoughts again. She glanced over at Amara, who was still sleeping, her small chest rising and falling with each breath. Despite the joy she felt knowing Amara was getting better, a heaviness still weighed on Clara's heart. The uncertainty of the future, of her relationship with Darnell, and of Amara's emotional recovery, kept her up at night. A few hours later, Darnell returned, his presence filling the room once again. He had a gentle smile on his face, but Clara could see the exhaustion in his eyes. He had been working hard, trying to balance his career and his newfound commitment to being there for Amara. "How's she doing?" he asked softly, walking over to Amara's bedside. Clara stood by the window, her arms crossed as she watched him. There was a familiar ache in her chest whenever she looked at him. She had spent so long being angry at him, so long hating the decisions he had made that had torn their family apart. But now, seeing him so involved, so present, she couldn't deny that there was a part of her that wanted to believe in him again. "She's better," Clara replied quietly. "The doctor is meeting with us later today to give a full update, but I think we're past the worst of it." Darnell nodded, his eyes softening as he looked at Amara. "That's a relief." He paused for a moment, then added, "I know I haven't been around the way I should have. I've missed so much of her life, and I can't make up for that. But I want to be here for her now. I want to be part of her life, her real life, not just the moments when things go wrong." Clara's heart skipped a beat. She could hear the sincerity in his voice, but that didn't make it any easier to trust. She had been doing everything on her own for so long. Could she really let him back in? Could she trust him to stay when things got tough again? "I know you want to be here, Darnell," she said softly, her voice steady despite the emotions bubbling inside her. "But it's not just about being here now. It's about showing up every day. It's about consistency. Amara needs that. I need that." Darnell's eyes met hers, and there was no defensiveness, no excuses. Just the quiet understanding that the road to forgiveness would not be easy. "I'm willing to show up every day, Clara," he said, his voice firm. "I don't know what the future holds, but I'm here. For Amara. For you. Whatever you need, I'll be here." Clara didn't know what to say in response. She was still unsure of everything. Her heart ached with the desire to believe in him, but the fear of being hurt again kept her guarded. She wanted to believe that they could make it work, that their family could be whole again. But after everything they had been through, it felt almost impossible. As the doctor entered the room, Clara shifted her focus to Amara, who was beginning to stir in her bed. The moment had passed, but the conversation had left an impact on her. She didn't know what the future held for her and Darnell, but for the first time in a long while, she was starting to believe that it was possible to rebuild something even if it wasn't perfect. The doctor greeted them both with a smile and began discussing Amara's progress. "She's recovering well," he said. "We've adjusted her medication, and she's responding to treatment. We'll continue monitoring her, but we expect a full recovery. It will take some time, but the important thing is that she's out of immediate danger." Clara's breath caught in her chest. Relief washed over her, and she felt the weight in her shoulders lift slightly. She glanced at Darnell, who was visibly relieved, his shoulders relaxing. "That's good news," Darnell said, his voice filled with gratitude. "Thank you, doctor." The doctor smiled. "You're welcome. We'll give her a little more time to rest, and then she can start light activities. Let's focus on her recovery first. You two are doing a great job being here for her." Clara smiled faintly, her heart still full of mixed emotions. She wanted to be excited about Amara's recovery, but there was still so much uncertainty in her heart. Could she and Darnell really find a way to make this work? Could they become the parents Amara deserved? She didn't know, but for now, she had to believe that they were on the right path. Amara's recovery was slow but steady, and the doctors were hopeful that she would be discharged soon. Every day, Clara felt a little more relieved as her daughter's color returned and her strength grew. But despite the positive signs, Clara couldn't shake the tension in the air. Things were still complicated. As much as Clara appreciated Darnell's presence and his newfound dedication to their daughter, there was a lingering feeling inside her. A fear. A fear that the stability they were building now might be fragile. What would happen when Amara was healthy again? Would Darnell stay? Would things slip back to the way they were before? Clara didn't want to get her hopes up. Every time Darnell walked into the room, his smile and warmth made her feel a little lighter, but also made her heart ache. It was hard to ignore the years of disappointment, the years when he wasn't there when she needed him most. But there was something else now too. A small flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could rebuild what they had lost. For Amara's sake, at least. This morning, the hospital room was filled with a quiet kind of peace. The sun shone through the window, and Clara had settled in her usual spot by the window, her fingers absent-mindedly scrolling through her phone. She had sent a quick update to her sister earlier about Amara's progress. There were still so many unanswered questions about the future, but at least today, things seemed to be calm. Darnell had just walked into the room, a coffee cup in hand, his eyes scanning Amara, who was still asleep. His presence still made Clara uneasy at times, but today it was different. It felt natural. Almost like old times. Good morning, Darnell said softly, not wanting to disturb Amara's rest. He took a seat in the chair across from Clara. Morning, Clara replied, glancing at him but quickly looking back out the window. She wasn't sure what she was waiting for. A sign, maybe. Something that would tell her if they were on the right path. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It felt more like a quiet understanding. They both knew that there were things left unsaid, but there was also an unspoken agreement that they would take it slow one day at a time. How are you holding up? Darnell asked after a while, his voice gentle. Clara sighed, her gaze still fixed outside the window. It's been a lot, she admitted. I'm tired, but seeing Amara getting better, it makes everything else feel a little lighter. Darnell nodded, looking over at Amara with a soft expression. She's tough, isn't she? Clara smiled, her heart swelling with pride. She's just like her mother. Darnell's lips twitched upward at that, and for the first time in a long while, Clara felt a sense of warmth from him. It wasn't the old warmth of the past, this was different. It was tentative, but real. He was trying, and Clara could see that. As the morning wore on, Amara woke up, her eyes fluttering open. At first, her gaze seemed unfocused, but then she looked around, and when her eyes landed on Clara, a faint smile appeared on her face. Mom. Amara whispered, her voice hoarse. Clara immediately leaned over her, her heart aching. Hey, sweetie. How are you feeling? Amara blinked, then seemed to take a deep breath. Better, she mumbled, shifting a little in the bed. I don't feel as sick anymore. Clara's face softened with relief, and she brushed a lock of hair away from Amara's forehead. That's good to hear, honey. Darnell stepped closer to the bed, quietly watching his daughter. Amara noticed him, her eyes widening slightly. For a moment, there was a look of uncertainty in her expression, but then she gave him a small, hesitant smile. Dad, she said quietly, her voice still weak. Are you staying? Darnell's heart clenched as he knelt beside her bed, careful not to get too close but wanting to be there for her. Yes, I'm staying. I'm here for you, Amara. I'm not going anywhere. Clara watched the exchange with a lump in her throat. Amara's simple question hit harder than she expected. The idea that Amara still wasn't fully sure of her father's place in her life, that she felt uncertain after all these years, hurt Clara. But Darnell's response, his sincere tone and the look in his eyes, was a small step toward healing. Darnell placed his hand gently on Amara's. You're going to be okay. We'll make sure of it, he said softly. Amara nodded, her eyes drooping as the medication started to take effect again. But before she fell back asleep, she whispered, I'm glad you're here. The words were quiet, but they struck Clara deeply. She saw Darnell's eyes flicker with emotion, and she realized that, in this moment, he wasn't just trying to rebuild his relationship with her, he was trying to rebuild it with Amara too. The rest of the day was spent in quiet, routine moments. The doctor came by with a positive update, confirming that Amara's condition was improving at a good pace. Clara felt the burden of worry lift just a little more. There was still a long road ahead, but they were making progress. Later that afternoon, Clara found herself alone with Darnell in the hospital room again. Amara was asleep, and the peace of the moment allowed Clara to breathe a little easier. She sat at the small desk near the window, her fingers tapping lightly on the table. So, Darnell began, his voice breaking the silence, what happens next? Clara looked at him, unsure of how to answer. What do you mean? I mean, what happens now that Amara is getting better, he asked, his eyes earnest. What happens with us? Clara's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure if she was ready to talk about their future, about the possibility of rebuilding their relationship. There were still so many unknowns. But at the same time, she knew they couldn't stay in limbo forever. I don't know, she admitted, her voice low. I guess we just keep going. Keep being there for Amara. We take things one step at a time. Darnell nodded slowly, a quiet understanding between them. One step at a time. It wasn't an answer, but it was a start. And in this moment, it was enough. The hospital room was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt like the calm before a storm. But this storm wasn't one of uncertainty or fear, it was the storm of change. Amara was finally well enough to go home, and with her recovery came a sense of peace that had been missing for a long time. Clara sat at Amara's bedside, smoothing the sheets and checking the small pile of things she had packed for the journey back to their apartment. Her heart was lighter than it had been in weeks, but there was still a weight, a small, lingering question that refused to leave her mind. What now? She glanced over at Darnell, who was standing by the window, staring out at the view of the city below. He had been by their side through every step of Amara's recovery. And though Clara couldn't ignore the bond that had begun to form again between them, she couldn't help but wonder if they were truly ready to be the family they once dreamed of. Could she trust him again? Was it too soon to even ask those questions? The past few weeks had shown Clara that Darnell was committed, he was showing up. But for Clara, showing up wasn't always enough. The scars from years of pain and disappointment were deep, and it wasn't easy to forget them. Amara stirred in her bed, her small hands tugging at the covers as she woke up. She blinked slowly, looking around the room. When her eyes met Clara's, she gave a sleepy but warm smile. "Mom," Amara whispered, her voice soft and raspy, still recovering from the sickness. "Are we going home today?" Clara's heart filled with a tender, protective love as she bent down to kiss her daughter's forehead. "Yes, sweetie," she said gently. "We're going home." Amara's face brightened, and she tried to sit up with excitement, but her body still felt weak from the illness. Clara was quick to help her adjust in bed, supporting her until she was sitting up comfortably. "That's good," Amara mumbled, her eyes closing again as she relaxed back into the pillows. "I missed home. And I missed my room." Clara smiled softly, smoothing her daughter's hair. "I know, honey. I missed it too. It'll be good to be back." Darnell, still standing by the window, turned when he heard Amara's voice. He walked over to the bed, his step slow but purposeful. When he reached Amara's side, he sat down beside her and gently took her hand. His touch was light but filled with tenderness, and for the first time, Clara saw him as not just her past but as the father Amara needed. "I'm glad you're feeling better, kiddo," Darnell said, his voice soft and sincere. "We're going to get you home, and everything will be okay." Amara looked up at him, her eyes searching his face for something she hadn't seen before. "Dad," she said quietly, her voice filled with a vulnerability that Clara hadn't noticed before. "You're really staying?" Darnell's heart seemed to skip a beat at her question. He glanced at Clara, who was watching them both with a quiet intensity. His gaze then returned to Amara, and he gently squeezed her hand. "I'm not going anywhere," he said with certainty. "I'm here for you. And for your mom. I promise." Amara's face softened, and a faint smile tugged at the corners of her lips. "Okay," she whispered, then closed her eyes again, allowing herself to rest. Clara and Darnell both sat in silence for a while, watching their daughter sleep peacefully. In that moment, Clara allowed herself to breathe, to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was hope for all of them. Later that afternoon, after the discharge papers had been signed, the three of them left the hospital together. The car ride back to their apartment was quiet but not uncomfortable. There was no tension in the air, just the soft hum of the engine and the occasional sound of Amara's soft breathing as she dozed in the back seat. Darnell drove slowly, his hands tight on the wheel as he focused on the road ahead. Every now and then, he would glance at Clara, unsure of what to say. The air between them was different now. It wasn't the same as it had been when they were younger. There was no more fighting or accusations, no more bitterness. But there was still a lot to figure out. When they arrived at their apartment building, Darnell helped Clara with Amara, carrying her inside and making sure she was comfortable on the couch. The weight of the moment wasn't lost on him. He was finally here. He was finally home, in a sense. Clara walked over to the kitchen, her mind racing with thoughts of what came next. Darnell joined her a few minutes later, standing in the doorway of the kitchen and watching her as she moved about the space. She was making a cup of tea, a simple act that felt like a tiny step towards something normal again. "So," Darnell said, breaking the silence, "what happens now?" Clara looked over at him, her gaze steady but filled with uncertainty. "I don't know," she replied honestly. "We take it one day at a time. That's all I can promise." Darnell nodded, understanding. "I'm willing to do that. I'll show up. I'll be here for both of you. I know I've made mistakes, but I'm not going to let that stop me from trying to be the father and the man I should have been." Clara looked at him for a long moment, weighing his words. She didn't know if she could trust him completely yet, but for the first time in a long while, she felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe they could rebuild something, even if it was just a small piece of what they had once dreamed. "Let's just focus on Amara right now," Clara said softly. "She needs us both. We'll figure the rest out when the time comes." Darnell stepped forward, standing next to her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The quiet filled the room, but this time, it wasn't uncomfortable. It was peaceful. Then, Amara's voice broke through the silence from the living room. "Mom, Dad, can I have some ice cream?" Both Clara and Darnell laughed softly, the tension in the air breaking. They walked into the living room together, side by side, ready to face whatever came next.